Hey folks, in November of 1966, a strange incident would unfold in Cowes, a prominent town on the Isle of Wight. For those who aren't familiar, the Isle of Wight is an island located right at the very south of the country in the English Channel, separated from the British mainland by a stretch of water known as the Solent. To the outside world, particularly during the summer months, Cowes is well known as the home of Cowes Week, a rather prestigious sailing event that generates a lot of tourism. However, as is often the case with some of these picturesque tourist destinations, there was a different reality bubbling beneath the surface. This was especially true once the tourists would go home and the cold winter months set in. As you might imagine, the off-season reality for the local youth was markedly different from the summer tourist adverts. It was an environment largely characterised by boredom, as was described by the youth themselves back then. From what I understand, there was a distinct lack of infrastructure for teenagers, and a sense of isolation that contributed to a thriving subculture of drinking and substance abuse. That information largely came from Damien's friend group, who remarked that they would try to gain access to pubs and such because they felt that there was nothing else for them to do on the island. This place was the home of the Nettles family, and specifically Damien Richard Nettles, who was just 16 years old at the time of this incident. Damien can only be described as a well-respected and a well-liked young man. His family described him as a funny, happy boy, and he was often considered the life and soul of the party. He was a talented musician, playing guitar in a band, and he had a clear future-oriented ambition to become a marine biologist that he was vocal about. This detail is important because it suggests a young man who was looking forward to his life and trying to achieve his goals, which is inconsistent with the idea of someone who would voluntarily disappear. Physically, Damien was hard to miss. He stood at a towering 6 feet and 4 inches tall with a slim build and was generally described by those that knew him as a gentle giant. He had short brown hair that was shaved at the back, styled in that distinctive curtains look that was incredibly popular in the mid-1990s. On the 2nd of November 1996, something would go awry. In the days leading up to this event, Damien had been visiting his older sister, Sarah, who was studying at Portsmouth University on the mainland. This visit is quite poignant in hindsight, because Sarah later recounted that she had sent Damien home early. She was a struggling student at the time and didn't have much money, so she gave him £10 for his travel and sent him back to the island. There were no reports of any distress during this visit, and then he returned to the Isle of Wight in good spirits, looking forward to the weekend's social activities. On the evening of the 2nd, Damien left his family home in the village of Gernard. He was dressed for the era and the weather, wearing blue jeans, a black fleece jacket, and his black Dr. Martens boots. His father, Ed Nettles, drove him to a party at a friend's house in East Cowes. The agreement between Damien and his parents was explicitly that he would return by midnight, a curfew that, as far as I can tell, he was generally known to respect. He arrived at the house party, accompanied by his best friend at the time, Chris Boone. However, the atmosphere at the party was reportedly underwhelming. So, between the hours of 8 PM and 9 PM, Damien and Chris decided to leave. They managed to get themselves some more cider, potentially from a local off-licence, and then made the decision to cross the river from East Cowes back into West Cowes, or as commonly known, just Cowes. One of the reasons for this was that Damien believed that his sister was also out on that night, and he was hoping to meet up with her. This movement back into Cowes is important to understanding the trajectory of the night. It shifted Damien from a relatively quiet residential area into the commercial centre of the town, where the nightlife and all the potential associated risks were all concentrated there. Upon arriving in the city centre via the ferry, the pair spent some time wandering the high street between 9 PM and 10 PM. They attempted to gain entry to several public houses. Given Damien's exceptional height of 6'4", they likely hoped to pass for adults despite being only 16. However, reports indicate that they were largely unsuccessful in getting served or gaining entry. This failure likely led to some frustration, and they ended up just drinking what they'd earlier purchased outside on the street. As the night progressed, the weather began to deteriorate significantly. By 10 PM, torrential rain and strong winds were sweeping through the coastal town. This weather drove many people indoors, emptying the streets and stripping away the eyes on the street that might otherwise have served as guardians or witnesses. At approximately 10:30 p.m, the two friends reached Northwood Park. Chris Boone, perhaps feeling the cold and perhaps acknowledging that the night wasn't going to improve, decided that he'd had enough and wanted to head home. This was a crucial moment that set the scene for the events to follow. For some reason, Damien declined to join him. Instead, he turned back towards the high street alone. I'm not sure why he made this decision. Perhaps he felt that he might have had better luck in gaining entry and getting served alone without Chris, given his height. Other ideas ranged from him seeking food, hoping to meet other friends, or perhaps attempting to gain illicit substances. Whatever the case might have been, you could rightly say that this moment marked the transition from a pretty low-risk social evening with a friend to a now high-risk solo venture in a storm. From this point onwards, Damien's behaviour appeared to become increasingly erratic, which suggests he may have been more intoxicated or disoriented than previously thought. At around 11:15 p.m, a witness reported seeing a young man matching Damien's description in the car park of the Harbour Lights pub located here. The individual was attempting to open the door of a blue Ford Fiesta. This kind of behaviour, trying car handles, suggests that he was probably experiencing confusion. He may have mistaken the car for a friend, or perhaps he was just desperately seeking shelter from the torrential rain. Just to be clear, if this was actually Damien, at that moment, it is very unlikely that he was trying to break into the car or steal, as that would have been completely out of character for him. Rather, it is suspected that he was just completely out of it for one reason or another. Shortly after this, between 11:20 and 11:30 p.m, another witness placed Damien at a bus stop near the Co-op supermarket. He actually boarded a bus and engaged the driver in conversation. Strangely, he allegedly attempted to take a random photograph of the driver using a black camera that he was carrying. Perhaps a further suggestion that Damien was a bit out of it, whether as a result of having too much to drink, or again, managing to acquire other substances as some have suspected over the years. Either way, he then thanked the driver and exited the bus without actually travelling anywhere. This incident confirms that Damien was still communicative and socially engaged, albeit acting a bit eccentrically. It's also worth noting that this black camera he was carrying remains missing to this day and is considered a key piece of lost evidence. Between 11:35 p.m. and 11:50 p.m, Damien entered Yorkie's Fish and Chip Shop on the High Street. This location provides the most substantial forensic evidence we have to suggest that Damien was not completely with it. CCTV footage shows Damien inside the shop buying a bag of chips. He was surrounded by a group of men. He looked unsteady on his feet, and after the group left, he was struggling to communicate his order to the staff.
One more. One, please. One, two.
Again, his physical state does suggest that he either had too much to drink or possibly other substances by this point. I will just add to that, Dennis Welsh, the man who served Damien his chips that night, later said in 2016 that given all of the late nights that he worked, he knew right away if someone had too much to drink. With Damien, however, he stated that he believed it was more than just drink. Now, there is something important that does need to be brought up in relation to this footage. Witnesses claim that a police car drove slowly past the shop's large glass window while Damien was standing inside. However, the copy of the tape that was later provided to the family and investigators allegedly had been edited. The section showing the police car, as well as the beginning and end of the sequence, had allegedly been spliced out. As you might imagine, that is a detail that has cast a long shadow over the entire investigation. At 11:55 PM, we have what I have seen referred to as the watcher witness. A person in a parked car on the high street was waiting to pick someone up when he observed a tall figure matching Damien's description. The person was huddled against the cold, eating chips. Assuming it definitely was Damien, he reportedly approached the car, wiped the rain from the window and said to the occupant, "They are watching us," before walking away. It is not clear whom he was referring to. This statement is open to multiple interpretations. It could have been substance-induced paranoia, it could have been a weird drunken prank or joke to a stranger for some reason, which I doubt, or it could have been reality, a literal reference to a group of people or something like that who were following him. I am just curious actually, if someone approached you and said something like that, how would you even react to that? The final confirmed sighting of Damien occurred just after midnight, between 12:02 AM and 12:06 AM on November 3rd. CCTV cameras on the high street captured him walking alone. He was seen still eating his chips, walking towards a bus stop, and then turning back to walk along the high street again. He walked out of the camera's frame and essentially disappeared as he was never seen again. If things weren't already weird enough, let's get bizarre. To complicate matters further, and this is truly frustrating, the Hampshire police actually lost this specific tape. This loss was catastrophic for the investigation because it prevented any further analysis of whether he was actually being trailed, his exact walking speed, if he appeared panicked, or any interaction that might have occurred just seconds later. How does that even happen? How can incompetence on this level even be possible in such an important job? The response of the Hampshire Constabulary in the immediate aftermath of the disappearance was marked by what can only be described as systemic failure. When Valerie Nettles, Damien's mother, reported her son missing on the afternoon of November 3rd, police protocols for missing youths should have been immediately activated. Instead, the police recorded Damien's age as 19 rather than 16. This might sound like a clerical error, which I suppose it was, but the consequences of that were profound. A 19-year-old male is legally an adult in the UK, with the right to disappear if he so chooses. A 16-year-old is not an adult and therefore cannot do that. This misclassification led to a complete lack of urgency, with officers assuming he had simply gone off or was staying with friends, somehow not realising that they should have been looking for someone who was just 16. They also just weren't very helpful in general, as despite the obvious concern and the fact that this was out of character for Damien, they had just assumed that he had ran off somewhere on the island. The family's attempts to drive the investigation were reportedly met with resistance and even hostility. Valerie was reportedly labelled as a hysterical mother by those she was seeking help from, and she was also told she was hampering the investigation by calling for updates. Crucially, requests for air searches using heat-seeking equipment and land searches with dogs were refused during the critical window when Damien might have been found injured or hypothermic. This is just absolutely insane, and I'm speechless to be honest with you. A mother worried about her missing son, in the eyes of some of those officers, was hysterical or a nuisance. In a situation like that, it shouldn't have been difficult to have had some empathy for the family, instead of just dismissing them. And to not use search dogs in this instance was also an incredibly poor decision given their effectiveness. This was a prime-time use case for them. The forensic integrity of the police investigation was further compromised by the loss of the audit trail. In addition to the alleged spliced chip shop tape and the lost high street CCTV, the station's call logs from that night, the 2nd of November, no longer exist. The duty roster, detailing which specific officers were on duty and in which vehicles have also been lost. This pattern of missing information and lost evidence is so pervasive that it fueled long-standing speculations and suspicions of this being purposefully hidden to hide total incompetence or something, I suppose. This is a problem entirely of their own making too. It's difficult to even imagine how every single aspect of this was just scuffed by them. I can see why so many people had their own suspicions here, because it's either that or just accepting that Mr. Bean had been placed in charge of every aspect of this case is a bit ridiculous. So, what actually happened to Damien? While the very initial police hypothesis drifted towards falling into the water, perhaps into the Solent, information gathered over the subsequent decades by the major crime team, journalists and private investigators potentially points towards a foul play scenario concealed within the island's illicit substance subculture. It's important to understand that in 1996, the island operated as a contained environment, creating a distinct social dynamic. This is characterised by close-knit community bonds, but also heightened secrecy in some sense. On an island so small where most people are going to know, or at least know of one another, in theory, you probably have to be very careful with what information you choose to share. Investigative reports do confirm that by the mid-1990s, the island had developed a robust internal market for illicit substances. The distribution networks were highly centralised and controlled by a small number of individuals, creating a dangerous environment where information was tightly controlled and intimidation was an effective tool for maintaining silence. Within this context, a primary suspect emerged as one name kept coming up. This was a man named Nicky McNamara. McNamara was a notorious figure in this underworld scene. Many reports over the years point to him potentially being central to Damien's demise. An informant who approached the family in 2010 but had actually spoken to the police as early as 2002 alleged that McNamara engaged in an altercation with Damien on the night of the 2nd of November. The alleged motive for this altercation allegedly stemmed from a substance transaction or a debt. It was claimed that McNamara threw a punch in anger with the intention to intimidate, but rather the blow proved fatal. There was a sighting at around 11:30 PM of 3 suspects walking down Sun Hill. Another witness claimed to see the main suspect, McNamara, coming out of a flat in Moira House on Sun Hill the following morning, carrying a suspicious rolled up carpet and placing it into a red car. Another report placed McNamara at an old shack on Shore Road that Sunday afternoon, burning suspected items of clothing in an oil drum while shouting. The witness later believed that this was an act of evidence destruction, though he said that he didn't put 2 and 2 together right then at the time. There were also rumours circulating that Damien, or his body, was concealed for 3 weeks before later being hidden elsewhere, perhaps in a wooded area. Specifically, the allegations suggest that a body could have been kept and then moved from Fellows Road to Shore Road. It was also reported that 5 other youths of Damien's age were called upon, or coerced I suppose, by McNamara, and others to assist with the disposal in lieu of debts. If true, I suppose this would have effectively bound them to silence through complicity, ensuring that no one could speak without incriminating themselves. I do just want to point out that while there does seem to be good reason for this intense suspicion, McNamara passed away in 2002, and while many point the finger towards him, nothing has ever been concretely proven or substantiated. Rather, it seems that there are a lot of rumours floating around about this, and later searches have been carried out around the Shore Road area, and into the woods with the use of cadaver dogs, but nothing has ever been uncovered. In 2016, the BBC documentary Unsolved: The Boy Who Disappeared brought a new figure into the public eye. It was a local who wanted to remain private and was so referred to as the Weatherman due to some of his personal hobbies. Journalists discovered that this individual, and potentially other associates of the McNamara group, possess copies of confidential witness statements. If this claim is factual, that would represent a rather catastrophic breach of police security. If suspects knew who had testified against who, then that would, in theory, allow for easy targeted intimidation, which would explain the silence of the Cows community for all these years if more information was genuinely known. Acting on this kind of information that was coming their way, the Hampshire police did launch a series of raids in 2011. 5 men, aged between 37 and 50, were arrested on suspicion of having something to do with Damien's disappearance. A woman was also arrested. They searched properties, including an address on Marsh Road in Gurnard. However, despite these arrests, no charges were ever brought. The Crown Prosecution Service likely concluded that without a body or definitive forensic evidence linking the suspects to a crime scene, the case relied too heavily on hearsay from informants, who themselves were thought to have credibility issues. Where the state failed, the community and media attempted to fill the void. The Nettles family, aided by friends and private investigators like Ivor Edwards, conducted their own searches. They dug in Parkhurst Forest based on tips, even when the Police and Forestry Commission refused permission. The BBC team also utilised cadaver dogs in their 2016 investigation, but nothing was found. Speaking of Ivor actually, he stated publicly that when the initial investigation into Damien's disappearance took place, the police learned of his involvement as the family's private investigator. Ivor had said that they told him that they did not want him investigating the case, and that it was their belief that Damien had tried to swim across the Solent to try to visit his sister. If that's true, then maybe Mr. Bean really was overseeing this case, because you've just got this officer going around saying some incredibly stupid things. It's one thing to reason that someone might have fallen into the water while being in Damien's state, which could be a completely reasonable deduction. But to suggest that he tried to swim across a body of water in the freezing cold to go and see someone is honestly just clinical stupidity at that point. Like, what are we even doing? It's hardly a ringing endorsement of officer proficiency at the time. Also, since Damien thought that his sister was in Cowes that night, he would have had no business in swimming across the Solent for that purpose. Moving past that, in November of 2023, the alarm was raised when bones were found in a garden in Cowes. You can only imagine the mix of dread and hope the family must have felt. However, a senior crime scene manager examined the bones and confirmed that they belonged to an animal. In 2024, Valerie publicly compared Damien's case to the high-profile disappearance of Jay Slater, highlighting the disparity in resources between modern disappearances that go viral for one reason or another, and older disappearances that don't quite reach the same kind of national attention. It's actually a good point. When you look at disappearances, such as Jay Slater as mentioned, or Nicola Bulley, there was massive amounts of press attention, but with others, it's just not the case. In fact, I remember quizzing my American viewers about Nicola, and many had heard about her from all the way across the pond, from news outlets over there. The reporting effort by the press was just enormous in that case. I'm not really sure how it comes to pass in terms of how much attention a disappearance will generate. You could say that maybe it was because of how odd it all appeared at the time, but there are plenty of cases in the UK that are as equally odd or suspicious in some respects that don't gain much attention at all. In any case, throughout this entire ordeal, the Nettles family has had to fight on two fronts essentially. One to find Damien and understand what happened, and one to hold the police accountable. Valerie has filed multiple formal complaints. A 2005 complaint resulted in the admission that the officer responsible for the lost CCTV footage had been acted upon previously, but no material recovery of evidence occurred. From my understanding, the footage had been taped over. What can you even say about that, really? In 2016, Valerie submitted a comprehensive complaint listing over 30 points of failure to the Independent Police Complaints Commission, the IPCC. The IPCC largely referred the matter back to Hampshire Police for local investigation, which seems to just be a process of investigating yourself, unless I'm missing something there. It's like, don't worry, we've investigated ourselves and found that we did nothing wrong. It's like, great. The family also launched a campaign for Damien's Law, a legislative change to ensure that missing young men receive the same immediate high-risk classification and resources as missing girls or younger children in general. It seems that a bias might have contributed to the police's initial assumption that Damien was simply staying out or had run away. It's something that still might be happening today actually. though not as egregious as in this case. But in my previous video, I reported on Jack O'Sullivan, who disappeared in 2024. And when his family tried to report him missing the following day, they were initially turned away and told it was too soon. Though in fairness, the police did allow that missing person report to go through about 4 hours or so after first trying. Damien's disappearance appears to diverge into two distinct possibilities, both compounded by his vulnerable state that night. The first, and the one initially suggested by the police, is that Damien may have succumbed to the elements. The CCTV in the chip shop did undeniably show him seemingly confused, slurring, and far more unaware than he might normally be. In such a state, navigating a coastal town like Cowes on a dark, wet and cold night certainly would be more dangerous. It is a possibility that he became disoriented and entered the water at some point accidentally. However, it is just important to say that it does seem as though the police themselves may have changed their minds or at least became open to other ideas over the years. For example, in 2013, Hampshire Constabulary's Superintendent, David Powell, said that he had maintained an open mind about what happened to Damien and was not ruling out any foul play scenarios. After all, there has been a lot of rumours and accusations over the years, but no concrete evidence has emerged, despite the same names coming up over and over again. If it is true that he encountered Nicky McNamara or other associates, you can certainly see how some altercation could have escalated into something much more, whether accidental or not. Ultimately, until that concrete evidence surfaces or someone finally speaks up, the truth of what happened that night remains unknown. We are left only with largely unsubstantiated claims, hypotheses and rumours, with a family still waiting for the answers that they deserve. That about brings us to the end of this. I'd just like to take the time to thank you for watching, and a big thank you to the patrons who've been running around on the screen. If you'd like to support the channel, there is a link to the Patreon in the description below. If you found this video interesting, please do remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you didn't like it, then feel free to give me a thumbs down. I'm just looking for your honest opinion either way. I hope that you've had a great day or evening, depending on where you are, and I'll see you in the next one. Be safe, guys. Peace.